When you say the word I, what exactly are you pointing at? Not grammatically. Not socially. I mean in reality. In the deep, physical, biological, psychological sense. Is it the body that was born with your name? Is it the stream of memories that only you seem to have? Is it some invisible soul riding inside your nervous system like a passenger in a very wet, very fragile machine? Or is it possible that what you call I is a kind of mirage? I want you to do a quick experiment with me. Call up 3 versions of yourself. First, you as a child. An image, maybe a feeling. The way your voice sounded, the things that terrified you, the things that felt like they would matter forever. Second, you in the future. Older, maybe wiser. Different clothes. Different worries. Perhaps different people around you. Third, imagine yourself completely unconscious on an operating table under deep anesthesia. No sights, no sounds, no thoughts. Just nothing that you can remember. Are those all the same, you? We talk as if they are. We file them all under the same mental folder labeled me. But if we press on that, very gently at first, the sense of a single, continuous owner of all those experiences starts to wobble. The child you had different beliefs, different desires, even a different brain structure. The future you may make decisions that the present you would hate. And the anesthesia you, in any phenomenological sense, the sense of what it's like to be you, doesn't seem to be there at all. There's a cut in the film. The movie jumps from before surgery to after surgery, and we just smoothly narrate. Yeah, I was there the whole time. Our experience insists. I am one continuous self. But every time we look closely, through philosophy, through neuroscience, through psychology, reality keeps finding ways to pull that apart. Let's stress test this intuition a bit more. Imagine the classic ship of Theseus, but now it's you. Every atom in your body is constantly being swapped out, proteins degraded and rebuilt, cells dying and dividing, the atoms in your bones and skin exchanging with the world. Over time, almost all of the physical stuff that made you last year is gone, replaced by new matter. If this process continues slowly, without a single dramatic break, we happily say, of course that's still me. But what is actually staying the same? If the hardware is changing, is there a deeper owner of your memories that survives this ship-wide renovation? Or is the continuity itself just a pattern of similarity, a story the system tells about itself, frame after frame? Push it a little harder. Teleportation. A machine promises to move you from Earth to Mars. It scans you perfectly, down to the quantum state of every particle, disassembles you here, and reassembles an identical copy there. That copy walks out, remembers signing up for the process, remembers this exact moment of doubt. It feels like you. It insists it's you. But from your point of view, spanning the moment where the machine destroys the original, did you move, or did you die? If the teleportation is gradual, replacing you atom by atom while you stand in the device, many people's intuitions soften. Okay, that still feels like me. But the physics doesn't care whether it's gradual or fast. The question remains, what is this elusive thing we're trying to preserve when we say, I? These scenarios are not just science fiction puzzles. They are stress tests. They push our intuitive model of the self, the mental cartoon we live inside, to its breaking point. In this episode of the Science Audit, we're going to do something a little audacious. We're going to run an audit on the self. We'll examine 3 major candidates for what the I might be. First, the classic idea, a single, soul-like thing, an indivisible essence that is really you. Second, the more biological picture, you as a particular organism, a living body with continuity in space and time. And third, a more unsettling but increasingly powerful idea from cognitive science and philosophy, that the self is a constructed self-model, a story your brain tells itself about what kind of thing it is. We're not going to walk out of here with a slogan as an answer. Reality rarely fits on a bumper sticker. But if we do this carefully, we can walk away with a sharper, more scientifically grounded sense of what self might mean, and maybe, what it cannot mean. Let's start with the default picture, the one most of us are handed without ever spelling it out. In everyday life, we act as if there's a single, me, living behind the eyes. A kind of driver in the control room, steering the body, making decisions, peering out at the world through the windows of perception. You wake up and think, I am in here, looking out at all of that out there. There's a sense of being a point, a center of experience, a stable observer that rides along as the scenery changes. The body can age, the personality can shift, But there's this core, this I, that owns it all. Philosophers have given this a lot of names over the centuries: the soul, the ego, the Cartesian self. Historically, the idea of an indivisible soul was not just psychologically comforting, it was also extremely useful. If you believe in a soul that persists after death, you can promise cosmic justice, rewards, punishments, reincarnations. If you believe in a stable inner core, you can anchor moral responsibility. You chose this. You deserve that. Society becomes easier to organize when we treat individuals as solid, enduring units. And to be fair, our own introspection seems to agree. When most people look inward, they don't see neurons firing or parallel processes. They see thoughts, feelings, images, desires. They feel like they are the one who has them. The owner. But not everyone's introspection pointed to a solid core. David Hume, the 18th century philosopher, sat down and really tried to catch this inner self in the act. He searched for some essence that remained the same while experiences changed. Instead, he reported finding only a bundle of perceptions, flashes of sensation, feelings, thoughts, constantly changing, never a stable entity underneath them. In Buddhism, centuries earlier, meditators reached a similar verdict: look closely enough at your own experience, and the sense of a permanent, separate self starts to dissolve. What you find instead are transient events, sensations, emotions, intentions, arising and passing in a vast, impersonal process. They called this anatta, no self. For a long time in the West, those ideas were largely philosophical curiosities. The soul-based picture of the self fit well with our religions, our legal systems, and our intuitions. But then we started opening skulls. Neuroscience arrived. And what we've found in that folded 1.5 kilograms of tissue is not a little driver sitting in a cockpit. It's a storm, massively parallel, decentralized activity. Think of your brain less like a single computer and more like a city at night seen from orbit. Different districts flicker and hum with their own local goals, visual areas processing colors and edges, language regions manipulating symbols, motor regions rehearsing movements, emotional circuits tagging experiences with value. None of these know the whole story, in the way your intuition imagines. Yet somehow, from this chaotic metropolis of processes, you get a unified feeling of awareness. It doesn't feel like multiple minds. It feels like one mind, one point of view. One way scientists try to explain this is called Global Workspace Theory. Drop the jargon for a moment, and imagine a dark theater. In the middle, there's a brightly lit stage. Around it, in the darkness, are many specialists, little processing modules, each with their own expertise. Vision, memory, language, motor control. Most of what these specialists do never reaches the stage. They work off in the wings, unconscious. But occasionally, some piece of information gets spotlighted on that central stage. It becomes globally available, broadcast to many of those specialized systems at once. According to Global Workspace Theory, what we call conscious experience is essentially what happens on that stage. When a thought or a perception reaches the global workspace, it can coordinate many areas at once. You can describe it, remember it, act on it, attach emotions to it. It feels like the center of your mind because, in a sense, it is the place where the disparate parts of your mind cooperate. Notice what's missing from this picture. There is no special inner observer sitting in the balcony, watching the stage. The stage, plus the audience of unconscious specialists, is the system. Another influential idea, predictive processing, goes one level deeper. In this framework, the brain is less like a passive camera and more like a prediction engine. It constantly generates expectations, guesses, about what's about to happen, both out in the world and inside your own body. When you reach for a cup, your brain doesn't just wait for sensory input. It predicts what your arm should feel like as it moves, what the cup will feel like in your hand, what your eyes should see as the scene shifts. The incoming signals are compared against those predictions, and only the errors, the mismatches, get passed up the chain to refine the model. In this view, perception itself is a controlled hallucination tailored by prediction errors. The brain's model of the world is constantly being adjusted so that it hallucinates reality correctly. So where does the self fit into this? Well, the organism doesn't just need a model of the external world. It also needs a model of itself, its body, its capabilities, its past and future. Something like, this is the kind of creature I am. These are my limits. These are my preferences. On this picture, yourself is the brain's best guess about what is producing these signals and actions. The self model is a running simulation of the organism that the organism uses to control itself. Now add one more layer, narrative. Psychologically, we are storytellers. Give us random events, and we will invent causes, motives, arcs. We do this with history, with other people's behavior, and we do it with our own lives. The narrative self is the story we tell about the protagonist called me. It's the internal biography. I'm the kind of person who, I was shaped by, I always, I never. Memory is the fabric out of which we weave this autobiography. But memory, as it turns out, is not a perfect recording. It is reconstructive. Each time you recall an event, your brain doesn't open a pristine file. It rebuilds the memory using fragments, expectations, and current beliefs. And each reconstruction can subtly change the memory itself. So you get this loop. The story you tell about yourself influences how you remember, and how you remember reinforces the story. Put all that together, and a bold idea emerges. Maybe the self is not a little pearl of identity hidden somewhere in the mind. Maybe the self is a model, a constantly updated, largely unconscious simulation of the organism I am, told as a story and experienced as a center of gravity for our thoughts and actions. That's already a radical shift from the soul in a body picture. But science didn't stop there. It found places where this self-model breaks, where the illusion gets weird enough that we can see its edges. One of the strangest comes from the split brain experiments. Inside your head, the left and right hemispheres of your brain are connected by a thick bundle of nerve fibers called the corpus callosum. It's like a bridge of millions of wires, allowing the two halves to share information. In rare, severe cases of epilepsy, surgeons used to cut this bridge to stop seizures from spreading across the brain. The surprising part was that patients often seemed mostly normal afterwards. They could walk, talk, work. They still said, I. But when researchers tested them carefully, a stranger picture emerged. Remember that each half of your visual field is mainly processed by the opposite hemisphere. The right visual field goes mostly to the left hemisphere, and the left visual field goes mostly to the right hemisphere. And crucially, in most people, language is mostly handled by the left hemisphere. So if you show a split-brain patient a word or image only in the right visual field, the left hemisphere sees it and can say what it is. Apple. Key. Smile. But if you show the same thing only in the left visual field, so only the right hemisphere sees it, something odd happens. The patient might say, I didn't see anything. Yet their left hand, controlled primarily by the right hemisphere, can reach out and pick up the correct object from a set. It's as if each hemisphere has access to different pieces of information, and they're not fully sharing anymore. In a famous experiment, researchers flashed different instructions or images to each hemisphere. For example, stand up goes to the right hemisphere only. The patient stands up. The researcher asks, why did you stand? The left hemisphere, remember that's the one that speaks, has no idea it received a stand up command. But instead of saying, I don't know, it makes something up. I was thirsty, so I decided to get a drink. This is called confabulation. The left hemisphere is inventing a story that makes sense of the behavior that the whole person is performing, even when it doesn't know the real cause. Some neuroscientists call this left hemisphere system the interpreter. It doesn't control everything. It's more like a narrative press secretary. It receives partial information about what the organism is doing and feeling, and it constructs a coherent story. I did this because I decided that. And here's the unsettling part. This interpreter isn't just something special that appears in split-brain patients. It looks like a normal part of how human minds maintain the illusion of a unified self. In split-brain cases, the seams are visible. One body, two partially independent awarenesses, each with access to different information, both somehow under the umbrella of me. So where is the one true self supposed to live? Is it in the left hemisphere, just because that half can say, I? That seems arbitrary. Is it in both in some fused way? But the whole point is that the direct connection has been cut. The lesson many researchers drew is that what we call self might be more fragile and more distributed than our intuitions suggest. The brain can be partitioned, and something like multiple centers of awareness can coexist. The unity we feel is not a simple reflection of a unitary object inside the brain. Other experiments take aim at a different intuition, that there is a clear boundary between what is me and what is not me. Consider the rubber hand illusion. You sit at a table. Your real hand is hidden behind a screen. In front of you, within view, is a realistic rubber hand. A researcher strokes your hidden hand and the rubber hand at the same time, in the same places. Within a surprisingly short time, many people begin to feel as if the rubber hand is their own. When the fake hand is threatened, for example, with a hammer, People show physiological fear responses, like sweating or stress reactions, as if their own body were in danger. From the outside, nothing magical has happened. But from the inside, the boundary of my body has shifted. The brain's model of what belongs to me can be hacked by synchronizing vision and touch. The inverse happens with phantom limbs. People who have had an arm or leg amputated sometimes continue to feel that limb, sometimes painfully. They may feel the fingers of a missing hand clenching, or an itch in a foot that isn't there. This tells us that the brain's model of the body can detach from physical reality. The map in your brain of my body can keep including territory that has been physically removed. There are even more dramatic cases, like alien hand syndrome. This is a rare condition where one hand seems to act on its own, performing actions that the person insists they did not will, like buttoning up a shirt that the other hand is trying to unbutton. In other disorders, people may deny ownership of a limb entirely, insisting, despite full sensation and movement, that this arm isn't mine. Together, these phenomena pry apart things we normally bundle together: intention, movement, ownership. They show that the feeling, I am the one who is doing this, with this body, is not guaranteed by the raw mechanics. It's something the system constructs. Then there's the timing paradox of decision-making. In the 1980s, neuroscientist Benjamin Libet ran now famous experiments. Participants were asked to make a simple voluntary movement, like flexing a finger, whenever they felt like it, while their brain activity was measured. Libet also asked them to watch a fast-moving clock and report the moment they became aware of the intention to move. What he found was unsettling. A specific pattern of brain activity, called the readiness potential, ramped up a few hundred milliseconds before participants reported the conscious decision to act. In some more recent experiments with sophisticated brain imaging, researchers can sometimes predict which choice a person will make seconds before the person reports having decided. On one interpretation, this means that you aren't really the one deciding. The brain initiates the action, and then your conscious awareness gets a delayed report and says, "Ah yes, I chose that." Free will, in this reading, becomes a post hoc story. There's a lot of debate about what these experiments really show. But whatever the final interpretation, they rhyme with the split brain findings. The system seems wired to protect a coherent narrative more than to expose the messy, parallel, sometimes unconscious process that actually produces your behavior. Add this all up, and a picture comes into focus where the I is less like the CEO of a company and more like the company's public relations department, very good at telling coherent stories about decisions that were actually made by a diffuse network of processes. This is where some of the most interesting models of self come in. Philosopher Thomas Metzinger, for example, proposes the self-model theory of subjectivity. The jargon sounds intimidating, but the core idea is surprisingly intuitive once you get it. Metzinger suggests that what you experience as being someone is your brain running a self-model, a detailed internal simulation of a body situated in a world, with goals, memories, and a perspective. Crucially, this model is transparent to you. That doesn't mean you can see through it. It means you don't experience it as a model at all. Like a perfectly clean window, you only see the world beyond, never the glass. You look out through the self-model and feel like you're directly in touch with reality, rather than seeing a constructed interpretation. In this view, there is no separate, metaphysical self hovering above the model. The model is what there is, phenomenologically. When the system is running a self-model, there is someone there, in the experiential sense. When it's not, under deep anesthesia, in dreamless sleep, there is not. Daniel Dennett offers a related, but differently framed, approach he calls the multiple drafts model. Instead of a single inner witness that receives a finished version of reality, Dennett suggests that the brain is more like a newsroom where multiple story drafts about what just happened are being written in parallel. Some drafts get revised, others are discarded. There isn't a single place or moment where consciousness happens. Instead, certain contents become influential. They get cited, echoed, reinforced, affect behavior and memory. Those are the ones we later call part of our conscious experience and our self. In this picture, the self is like the character that emerges from the stories the newsroom keeps telling about the organism's behavior over time. There's no ghostly observer. There's just a bundle of interacting processes, some of which specialize in building narratives. The tension here is obvious. These models fit many of the data points we've been exploring. They explain how split brain effects are possible, why illusions of ownership and timing occur, why confabulation is so pervasive. But they also clash, in a visceral way, with how it feels to be you. Right now, you don't feel like an emergent character in a bundle of narrative drafts. You feel like a single, unbroken subject, a point from which the world is witnessed. So we land in a strange position. The more carefully we examine the brain and mind, the harder it is to find a single, solid self. Yet the sense of being one seems undeniable. Does that mean the self is an illusion? And if so, in what sense? The word, illusion, is easy to misunderstand. It doesn't exist at all. A rainbow is an illusion. There is no physical object, arc of colors, hanging in the air that you could walk over and touch. The rainbow is a structured appearance that arises when sunlight interacts with water droplets and an observer's perspective in a very particular way. It is not a tangible thing in the world in the way a rock is, but it is reliably there under the right conditions, and it has real, describable structure. When cognitive scientists say that the self is an illusion, they mean something similar. You are not what you intuitively think you are. You are not an indivisible, unchanging mental pearl at the center of your mind. The sense of being that kind of entity is a constructed appearance, a feature of how the brain models and predicts and narrates its own activity. But an illusion can be incredibly useful. Think of the icons on your computer screen. A blue folder, a little trash can. Those icons are not literally what's happening inside the machine. They are simplified representations, a user interface. Their job is not to show you the deep truth of the hardware. Their job is to let you get things done, drag, drop, delete, without having to think in terms of electrons and magnetic domains. On this analogy, the self is evolution's user interface for controlling a very complex organism. Instead of exposing you to raw spikes of electrical activity and synaptic weights, the brain presents you with a manageable world of I want, I fear, I choose, I remember, centered on an I that feels solid. That interface is an incredibly efficient way to coordinate action, decision-making, and social interaction. So is the self fake? No more than a rainbow or a desktop icon is fake. It's real as a pattern, as a process, as a way the universe organizes matter and energy to do very specific things. What changes is not whether your feelings, values, and relationships are real. They are. They are among the most real and consequential phenomena in your life. What changes is what you think the owner of those things is. If there is no little metaphysical capsule of identity floating inside you, then who, or what, is responsible when harm is done? When kindness is offered? When a promise is kept or broken? Ethically, this pushes us toward a different focus. Instead of picturing morality as something that sticks to a soul, we can think in terms of patterns in a system. Behaviors, habits, beliefs, reactions. Responsibility becomes less about punishing a ghost in the machine and more about shaping patterns, through education, environment, institutions, so that harmful patterns are less likely to recur and helpful ones are more likely to spread. This doesn't mean individuals vanish into the background. It means individuals are understood as evolving, context-sensitive systems, not as fixed essences stamped, good or evil, for eternity. It also suggests something profound about time. The you watching this right now and the you 30 years from now are not identical. They may share some memories and traits, but they will differ in countless ways, biologically, psychologically, socially. If the self is a story, then your future self is, in some sense, a sequel written by choices you're making now. But it's also a partially distinct character. This may explain why we procrastinate, why we fail to save for our future, why we sometimes treat our long-term health as if it belongs to someone else. Because in a deep sense, it does. Recognizing this can change how we motivate ourselves. Self-compassion starts to look less like indulgence, and more like responsible stewardship. You are not just living for a single, static self. You are taking care of a moving pattern that will become many future versions of you. Practically, what can we do with this self as model idea in everyday life? One thing it can do is soften harsh self-judgment. When you catch yourself thinking, I am just this way. I am broken. I am lazy. I am unlovable. You can quietly insert a different frame. Right now my system is running a story that I am broken, lazy, unlovable. That sounds semantic, but it opens a gap. It reminds you that these are patterns, habits of thought and feeling, rather than verdicts about an unchangeable essence. If the self is a model, models can be updated. Reframing personal change becomes more realistic and more hopeful. You're not trying to magically swap out one eternal I for a better one. You're editing a story, one chapter, one paragraph, one sentence at a time. You can adjust the narrative you use to explain your past. You can adjust the habits that shape your future. You can adjust the environments and relationships that feed certain versions of you and starve others. Therapy, in this light, is collaborative self-model revision, Mindfulness is moment-to-moment awareness of the story as it writes itself, rather than being completely merged with it. When you sit in meditation and watch thoughts, sensations, and emotions come and go without automatically acting on them, you are directly experiencing the fact that the contents of consciousness are not the same as the I that notices them. Push that further, and sometimes people report that even the I that notices dissolves. There are just experiences, arising and passing. The self-story pauses, and yet something is still happening. You don't need to chase that kind of experience to benefit from these insights. Even a small bit of distance can change how tightly you grip your own narratives. Instead of, I always screw things up, you might notice, my brain tends to highlight my mistakes and ignore my successes, and then my interpreter weaves that into a story of being a failure. That's not self-delusion. That's a more accurate description of what's actually happening. On a societal level, recognizing the self as process rather than essence can support more humane systems. Justice that aims to reduce harm by reshaping conditions and patterns, rather than branding people permanently. Education that treats identities as works in progress rather than destinies. And yet, even as we deconstruct, something beautiful remains. Let's gather the threads. We began with a simple, disarming question: when you say, I, what exactly are you referring to? We watched our intuitive picture, a tiny inner driver, a soul-like entity steering the body, meet challenge after challenge. Atoms being swapped out like planks on the ship of Theseus. Teleportation scenarios questioning whether continuity is about matter, pattern, or something else. Philosophers and contemplatives looking inward and finding no solid core, only streams of changing experience. Then neuroscience joined in. We saw the brain as a massively parallel city of processes, not a single command center. Global Workspace Theory gave us a stage where information becomes conscious by being broadcast widely, without needing a little homunculus in the audience. Predictive processing reframed perception as controlled hallucination, with the self as the brain's best guess about the organism it's controlling. We found the narrative self, a biography we tell ourselves, knitted from reconstructive memories that change every time they're recalled. At the edges, we encountered split-brain patients whose divided hemispheres behaved like partially independent minds, rubber hand illusions and phantom limbs showing that body ownership is negotiable, alien hands and timing paradoxes hinting that intention and awareness can be out of sync. From there, we examined models like Metzinger's self-model theory and Dennett's multiple drafts, pictures in which the self is not a fundamental thing, but an emergent pattern of modeling and storytelling in a biological system. All of that brought us to an unsettling, but powerful, synthesis. The I you feel is not a tiny pearl of identity. It is a dynamic, transparent model. A useful fiction. A rainbow of processes that evolution has carved into the wet tissue of a brain to let a particular clump of matter navigate the world, coordinate its parts, and cooperate with others. Your self may be an illusion in the technical sense, a structured appearance that misrepresents its own nature, but the consequences of that illusion are very real. Your love for specific people. Your grief when you lose them. Your sense of duty or curiosity or creativity. These are not invalidated by the fact that the owner is not what you thought. They are exactly what this pattern does when it exists. So here is the contemplative takeaway I want to leave you with. Tonight, or whenever you have a quiet moment, sit somewhere comfortable and close your eyes. Let your attention wander over whatever arises, sensations in your body, thoughts about your day, fragments of memory, worries about tomorrow. Each time a thought appears that begins with I am tired, I should have done better, I'm excited, I'm scared. Pause for just a second. Ask yourself, very gently, what is this I in this sentence? Instead of answering with words, just look. Is it a feeling in the chest? A point behind the eyes? A voice narrating? A posture the whole system takes? Notice how fluid it is. How different I feels when you're remembering childhood versus imagining the future versus worrying about whether other people like you. You don't have to come to a conclusion. The exercise is not to abolish the self, but to glimpse its constructedness, to see that I is a moving target, a role being played by a vast ensemble of processes. Then ask yourself one more question. If there is no single, unchanging thing at the center, if I is a story this organism tells, what kind of story do I want this system to tell next? Because stories can be edited. Patterns can be reshaped. And every moment of awareness is a small chance to tilt the trajectory of this self-model toward curiosity, kindness, and deeper understanding. And that brings us to the next great question. We've asked whether the self is an illusion, and we've seen how a convincing interface can masquerade as a fundamental thing. But the self is not the only part of reality that might work like this. If our sense of being a single, continuous I is a carefully structured illusion, what about our sense of time? If time is not what it seems, if past, present, and future are not as sharply divided as we feel them to be, what does that say about the memories we hold most dear, the regrets we carry, and the hopes we project forward? In other words, if the self is a story told in time, and time itself might be another exquisitely crafted interface, what happens to our understanding of a life, of a lifetime, when we audit time with the same ruthlessness we just turned on the I? That's the door we'll walk through next. For now, you can simply sit with this. Out of cells, electricity, and stories, the universe has given rise to a pattern that can look back on itself and ask, what am I? Whatever the ultimate answer, that question alone is one of the most beautiful things the cosmos has ever done.